Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, and all else to a brand new show on the channel. The title should be pretty self-explanatory, but in case you're confused, allow me to explain. The concept of this show is that I go on the Creepypasta wiki, I go on this useful tab known as Site Navigation, and go down to Random Story, where I find a, well, random story, read it, offer my thoughts, go off the cuff, all that kind of stuff. Before we begin, I just want to say, I hope you're all doing well, I hope you're staying safe, and I hope things are going well for you. The future is pretty uncertain, but we'll get through this together, and I believe in you, and I hope everything's going well. Here's to hoping things turn out as best as they can. Let's brave this together, and hopefully things will turn out alright. With that out of the way, let's begin by reading 3 random creepypastas. I hope you enjoy. Alright, we have found our first story, simply titled, The Scraping Wheels. Let's see if it's any good. This sucks, I muttered to myself as I felt another bead of sweat form on my hairline. What a great day to wear a sweater. I could have sworn it was frigid cold this morning. Now, however, the concept of cold was foreign and distant as the sun beat down on my back. My Converse scuffled against the sidewalk and I adjusted my 100-pound backpack to fit more comfortably to no avail. So far my week had been shitty. From my parents arguing again to my boyfriend dumping me to the loads of homework teachers seemed to pour into my hands. The walk home from school was not improving anything. My favorite black sweater clung to me as the heat drew every drop of moisture from my skin. Aside from it being hot as hell, the alone time I got from it was pretty nice. No friends to start drama, people to whisper rumors about me as I walk past in the hall. Just me, the grass, the dirt, the trees, and any animal nearby at the time, and the sun. At a time like this, people were shut inside their houses, drawing the blinds, turning up the AC, so naturally I should have been alone out in the sun. But I wasn't. I felt eyes boring into me, giving me goosebumps even on a hot day like this. My eyes flicked up instinctively. I wasn't wrong. Standing at the end of the sidewalk was an old woman, her withered face surrounded in cloth. She was layered up, even wearing a coat. Out of all the weird things about this lady, the weirdest was the baby carriage. It looked antique, it was white, with one of those sunshades over it. Its wheels looked old, rusty, and uncared for. Even after I looked up, the woman continued to stare at me. I shrugged it off and forced my stiff legs to keep moving. I could always run to a house for help if I needed it, I told myself. We are off to a pretty strong start. It starts out, very miserably with like, oh, it's so hot here. And now we have this weird woman looking at the main character. I'm actually really liking this so far. I hope the story can keep this up. Her eyes followed me as I passed her. It took all my strength to keep me from shuddering. The sidewalk ahead of me was the focal point of my vision. As I continued forward, I heard a noise behind me. It was squealing, squeaking, ear-splitting. The carriage was moving. I walked faster. I could hear the old lady's footsteps. Every push of the carriage resulted in another scraping symphony against the sidewalk. I wanted to run, to go home and never leave again. I turned into the short alleyway that led to my house. The noise stopped. I glanced over my shoulder. The hideous woman was still there staring at me, unblinking, her precious carriage's handle clutched in her withered hands. Was there even a baby in that thing? I didn't want to know. Hurriedly, I unlocked the door with shaking hands and threw it open. "I'm home," I announced, and glad to be. A snack sounded like heaven, so I threw my stuff on the couch and headed for the kitchen. No response came to my declaration of presence, so I assumed I was home alone. Sweet. After some Oreos, I decided to tackle my mountain of homework. A few minutes in, and the old lady with her carriage was behind me. I glanced up at the clock at about 9 p.m. It was almost past my bedtime. Where were my parents? I wandered downstairs and saw a bright yellow note stuck to the refrigerator that I hadn't noticed before. I snatched it up and read it aloud. "Dear Jocelyn, just wanted to remind you that Dad and I have counseling. We are going out of town and won't be back till tomorrow afternoon. Love you, stay safe. Mom." Crap, I had totally forgotten. I had the place all to myself, but I was tired. Screw it, I was going to bed. mood. You know, I'm really liking this. We're approaching the final paragraph, but so far this story has been really strong. It's very brief, but it's very well written, I would say. I'm getting a real feel of it, you know? I like the vibe it's going for, you know, first seeing an old lady that is just staring you down. It's a very relatable thing, you know, having weird people staring at you, making you feel uncomfortable, and then you're suddenly home alone. I like this. Let's see if the story can wrap it up. I woke up at midnight, after the face of the old woman had floated in and out of my dreams. Tears of fear stained my face. I quickly wiped them off and went to the bathroom to wash with cold water. While staring at my face in the mirror, I pondered the woman. Reaching no conclusion, I meandered back to bed. It wasn't until I was staring at the ceiling when I heard the noise. Squealing, scraping, rusty wheels, coming towards my bedroom. It's my imagination. Just my imagination. My body was frozen in panic. The noise, the unbearable noise, grew louder and louder until I wanted to throw my hands over my ears. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stared at my doorframe. The sound stopped. There in the door were two pairs of red eyes. One small and one large. One woman and one baby. Alright, that's the story. We don't know what happens next, so we'll leave that up to imagination, I guess. Damn, I will say, I really enjoy that, and I really appreciate the atmosphere it was able to build up in such a short amount of time. I really like that, actually. You know, you wonder, you know, what's going on with the old lady? Does she have a baby? Apparently she does have a baby with red eyes, which is a scary thing to think about. I like that quite a bit. It did not go overboard with like gore or disturbing imagery. It was short, it was effective, and quite creepy. I really appreciated the beginning where the author really set the tone well with like, you know, the temperature being really unbearable, them describing how the neighborhood was feeling, and then describing the old woman and how uncomfortable the woman made the main character feel, and then going home and having the whole house to themselves, you know, feeling free and everything like that. But also setting up the fact that they're alone and without protection because, you know, the parents are away. I will say, I really like that. I found that to be very, very good. Overall, I'd give it probably like a 7 out of 10, you know. It really was a nice, neat little story, and I very much enjoyed it. So, good job, author. I really liked it. Alright, going down into the comments, it seems that Death is Escape 666 was the one who wrote it, who says, "First creepypasta, I know it's not that good, so can you help me improve?" It is good, bro. It's really good. I like it a lot. I mean, it could just be a random comment, or it could be the author, so if Death is Escape 666 is indeed the author, then good job. I really liked your story. Alright, let's move on to story number 2. Alright, we have another one here called Since When Do Mannequins Bleed? That's an interesting title to say the least, so let's get to it. Ugh, that bastard Manny woke me up again in the middle of the night. I absolutely hate it when he does this. This time, I guess he had a good reason to wake me up like that. I just wish he wasn't an asshole about it. Manny and I, we have a strange relationship, I'd say. Even our meeting was weird. He just appeared at my place one day. He was sitting on my couch, reading my copy of Dan Brown's Demons and Angels. I'll admit this much, his appearance at my place wasn't random at all. I can swear I've seen him looking at me as if admiring me from a distance for weeks before our meeting. It's hard to miss the guy. He sticks out like a thorn in a crowd's side, given his odd-looking head. Manny's appearance is mostly unremarkable, other than what appears to be a pale white smiling mask permanently fused to the skin of his head. It looks like he has a purposefully deformed mannequin head stuck on his body. Hence the name, Manny. Somehow, no one else has ever noticed him. Usually people write me off as mental whenever I mention him, which is why I avoid talking about him to others. When I saw him sitting on my couch like he owned the damn thing, my instinctive reaction was to get mad. I yelled something obscene and pounced on the couch with the intent to maul him with my hands. What came next scared the living hell out of me. I hit the couch and flipped it over, but the bastard was gone. He disappeared on me before reappearing behind me and letting out his distinctive high-pitched chuckle of his. He said that he was going to play me like a marionette, and then vanished again. I just sat there flat on my ass, scared out of my wits. I had no clue what the hell had just happened to me. I'm still not entirely sure. It's been years now, and Manny comes and goes. Whenever he shows up, I know it'll be one heck of a ride. He pops up and does his best to make my life hell. Not letting me sleep by being an incredibly loud, unwanted roommate, or by driving me nuts with his mostly moronic rants just before I go to sleep. Other times he shows up and just makes me feel like shit by giving me vivid accounts of horrible things about me and the world. His recollections feel as if he's feeding the imagery directly into my brain. I can quite see the horrors he's speaking of. Needless to say, that makes me feel horrible. Well, this guy seems to be quite the unpleasant guy to be around, right? I think he can even influence my dreams at this point. I swear, whenever I have a nightmare, I wake up to him standing at the edge of my bed, staring straight into my soul. Usually, these nightmares I think he gives me are events from my past, amplified and perverted into haunting scenes straight out of some horror flick. Other times these nightmares are just distressingly weird, things you'd not expect to see in your sleep, like that one time when he made me dream of me viewing black and white footage of what appears to be the main street of someone's city, devoid of people with this dramatic music playing in the background. The atmosphere of this whole thing felt incredibly off, but then came the truly terrifying part. Singing. Quiet, cheerful singing came to flood my ears, forcing me to look around for the source of the sound. My dream self looked up, and above it, me, hung women dressed in 20s outfits, swinging from the streetlights, lifeless, swaying softly in the wind, and yet singing cheerfully. I woke up in a cold sweat to be greeted by the pallid mug of that bastard. Yeah, that is the type of imagery that you would have in a dream. I like where the story is going so far. It's very bizarre and strange, but I'm intrigued. Over the years, he'd pull some nasty trick where he'd stand there in the distance, making sure I see him before pulling out a long black rod and stabbing himself somehow. As in with some voodoo magic. I'd feel it wherever he stabbed himself. Usually the leg. It hurts so bad whenever he does this. He seems to have this gleeful expression on his face, like he's enjoying the pain while I want to scream as a result of the sensation of a boiling hot metal rod slicing through my nerves. The first time was as shocking as hell. I've bitten so hard through my lip due to the pain, I now have a scar there as a reminder of that day. Unfortunately, I've come to accept it as a part of my experience with Manny. That's not even the worst of it. The worst part about Manny, however, isn't this sort of stuff, nah. The worst part is when he pops out of nowhere and lets out a thunderous roar straight into my ear before vanishing again. Whenever he does this, I tense up like crazy. It's akin to having a cannon shot right off next to you. Sometimes I stay tensed up for hours, others it goes away within minutes. After each encounter with Manny, regardless of what he does, I end up being stressed, vigilant and aggressive, and above all else, exhausted. Sometimes to the point of wanting to just throw myself off somewhere high. That has definitely affected me in more ways than one, hence why I mostly isolate myself from others. He's trying to ruin my life, I'm sure. I don't know why me. I didn't do anything wrong. I've always loved helping people. I didn't put on the uniform for the pay. I only ever wanted to do some good, you know? The closest I could be to being a superhero, I guess. Well, I was sure he was trying to mess up with me up until tonight. This time, it was different. He woke me up by shaking my body awake. Seeing his ugly mug before even fully waking up gave me that adrenaline kick. I punched him square in the head. Although my fist never connected, it just went straight through his head. "Hey, hold up, doll!" he yelled as I pulled my hand backward, cursing under my breath. "I'm here to help ya," he continued. I didn't believe him. He was just trying to mess with me again, I reasoned. So, I tried ignoring him and going back to sleep. I shrugged him off and pulled the blanket tightly over my head. He shook me again. "Oi, dolly, get up! This time I'm here to help. Pinky promise!" "Fuck off," I barked, trying to drown his presence out of my head with some pleasant memories. "Shh, they'll hear ya." He shushed me. Something was wrong with that statement. Usually there are no others involved in his cruel jokes. I pulled the blanket from my head and looked him dead into his empty eye marks. "What are you talking about?" He mouthed, "Quiet down your tone." Huh? I questioned, confused and genuinely pissed off at this point. There are 3 mannequins in your house. They don't mean no good, Dolly, he whispered. Bullshit. I barked back with a whisper. I didn't even know why I was whispering, really. Listen for yourself, Dolly, Manny hissed, pointing at where his ears should have been. I did as he said. It was dead silent. I was going to throw another fit at the creature that's been haunting me for the last few years, but then my thought process was cut short by the sound of footsteps. 2, 4, 6. My heartbeat sped up. I slowly got out of my bed, walked towards the bedroom door. I always keep it locked, even though I live alone. It's like an OCD thing. I stood by the door and listened. Someone was definitely walking around in my house. 3 people, in fact. They were saying things I couldn't understand. They were too quiet. My breathing was becoming shallow and my body was getting hot. I could feel my own temperature slightly rising. Manny whispered, "Told ya." I just stared at him, and he took a step back. That had never happened before. Some switch inside flipped, and the bastard smiled at me. I just kept listening to what was happening outside the room. The pallid bastard opened up a closet and pulled out my 2 baseball bats before telling me to pick one. He knew what was going through my head. He knew exactly what I was going to do. I took one of the bats, the black one. It felt nice in my hand. Manny vanished. I cranked my neck, and the door handle twisted. The door to my room swung open. Before me stood a literal mannequin. I could almost hear something snap inside. It didn't expect me to be awake. I moved swiftly, expertly, nearly take its head off with the bat. The sound of cracking, thick plastic boomed in my ears. The mannequin collapsed to the floor. I went out to the hall. Another mannequin stood with its back to me. This one white. I think there was something attached to its plastic hand. I took a swing to its back, and it bent in half before collapsing on all 4s. A second hit to the back of the head. It wasn't moving anymore. The third one saw me, a brown one. It ran towards the front door. I followed. It wasn't going to get out just like that. I caught up to it. It started making pleading movements with its arms. Ugly piece of shit. I swung the bat on top of it. I swung once, twice, thrice. I swung over and over again. Even after it was crumpled on the floor, with many parts collapsed on themselves. Once I was done with the third mannequin, Manny popped up again. He spat his poison in my ear again. Tie him up and dump him in the garage for now. I did just that. I wasn't even thinking on my own. I was on autopilot. Good thing the front door was unlocked. The adrenaline wore off quickly, and I was exhausted once more, a completely worn out man. I headed back to my bed, almost as if nothing had happened. I was pretty docile and relatively calm after that. I passed out on the spot pretty much. Manny was nowhere in sight, thank God. I slept like a baby. Waking up this morning, I remember what had happened in the night before, and my mind raced again, forcing me to feel like the world would collapse on top of me if I didn't check the garage. The moment I got out of my bed, cortisol filled my system once more. I noticed a massive bloodstain on the floor. Since when do mannequins bleed? Alright, this story was written by Bloody Spaghetti. That's a good name. Alright. That was very atmospheric, and while it didn't go as in-depth, with describing the environments and the feel, the vibe of that the previous story did, I would say the atmosphere was still very strong, and I didn't feel like it needed to go, very in-depth with, the environmental storytelling. It was much more personal and intimate, and I liked that quite a bit. I really liked how the story evolved, what Manny was doing. It started off innocently enough, and then it went on a bit, more talking about what Manny was doing. I felt it somewhat dragged a little bit in the middle, I feel like it could have moved a little bit quicker then, but that's just my personal opinion. But, once that fateful night hit where suddenly there were these alive mannequins in the protagonist's home and he attacked them, and Manny was there egging him on, I felt that's when the story really became alive and I was excited about what would happen next. I would say the twist where it was like, oh, were they mannequins? Were they not mannequins? I felt that was a little predictable, and I guess it's also up to your imagination, were they weird mannequins? Were they actual people? Were they creatures? Stuff like that. Maybe there are hints in the story that the author is not all there, and maybe they're hallucinating. Could be something like that, which is a pretty cool theory, I will have to admit, because if you have an unreliable narrator, you're not quite sure. So that's an interesting thing that the story is making me think of. All in all, I would say that was a pretty good story. I would also probably give it like a 7 out of 10. I would say that was good. It was short, sweet, atmospheric, and left me with a few questions. Sometimes not having the answers can be frustrating, but in this case I would say the story executed it quite well. So, good stuff. I like that one quite a bit. With that said, story number 3 coming right up. Alright, our third and final story for now is called How to Become a Nightmare. Let's find out! Another patient entered the office of Dr. Shire. The patient was a male, mid-20s and an average build. He had little to no distinctive features about him except for his eyes. They were a dark brown, but it was not his actual eyes that drew attention to himself. It was the circles of darkness around them, clear symptoms of sleepless nights. Again. Dr. Shire noted this in his notepad when the man took his seat on the leather couch. Eyes looking darker this time, probably restless. Ask about caffeine intake. Edward, what brings you in today? The doctor asked. I thought we made an impact the last time I saw you. Edward began to play with his hands, keeping his eyes down and away from the doctor. Oh, you know me. Fix one thing and 2 more break. Edward laughed in an unconvincing tone. Finger playing, no eye contact. Nervousness is obvious. You can talk to me, Edward. No need to be nervous. I assume you're having bad dreams again, Dr. Shire asked. Yes, they're back. Mary is worried about me. She said she notices changes in me, but I'm not sure what she's seeing, Edward responded. Changes? Physical or mental? What kind of changes? She says I appear more distant. She told me the other day that I almost walked into oncoming traffic 2 weeks ago. I don't remember that at all. Absent-mindedness in extremity. Note possible new occurrence of PTSD? Related to dreams? That is quite extreme. Have there been other occasions of this happening? Dr. Shire scrunched his eyebrows. Yes. On another occasion, Mary said that I was laughing uncontrollably. Edward stopped playing his hands and looked at the doctor. What were you laughing about specifically? Dr. Shire asked, tilting his head to reveal his ear closer. I don't know, doctor. I remember sitting in the living room watching a documentary on the Holocaust. But there's a gap in my memory when Mary told me about the laughing. She said I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. Okay. Gap memory of psychotic episodes? Medication change may be needed. I see. I'm going to recommend a new change in medication. It seems like your depression may be coming back. That should take care of the memory gaps and the absent-mindedness, but these dreams, tell me more about them. Are you taking any source of caffeine before going to bed? Sugar included? Any sort of stimulant? Dr. Shire flipped to the next page in his notepad. Edward made a clear shift in his seat, as if Dr. Shire had said something offensive to him. No. I don't drink any kind of caffeine anymore, and I don't like sugary snacks before bed. Dreams must be trauma-based, not side-effect driven. Ask about dream content, and what happens in these dreams. Can you remember any? I can remember every single one. They get worse, it seems. Each night it's something new. The same place, same time, but there's something with me. It's looking for me. Where's it taking place? What's looking for you, Edward? Edward's eyes began to dart from left to right in the room. It's a house. An old house. I wake up in an empty room. It's Raining outside, thundering. I get up and out of the bed and walk over to the door in the room, but I can't open it. House could be a representation of childhood trauma. Rain could mean gloom or dread. Why can't you open the door? If I do, it will find me. What's looking for you? An old friend. Edward stood up and began to put on his coat. I think I'm fine for today, Doctor. Dr. Shire nodded and wrote down a new prescription for Edward. I understand. I want you to take 2 of these a day from now on. If you had any more dreams like this, I want you to write them down in your journal. Take care, Edward. Edward took the slip of paper and left the office. Dr. Shire stood and went over to his desk to look over his notes. He began to write more into his notepad. Possible occurrence of a depressive manifestation through nightmarish interaction. Odd description as an old friend. What does he mean? Why would something he sees as fearful also be friendly? Could be possible frontal lobe trauma. Manic episodes might be a result of new disorder or possibly stress-related. A week later, and Edward came again to the office, but he looked noticeably different. He seemed much more pale and thinner than a week ago somehow. Dr. Shire took note of this. Significant weight loss, paler composition. Nightmare? Ah, Edward, it's good to see you again. What brings you here? Edward remained standing. He pulled out a small journal from under his coat, handing it to the doctor. I did as you asked, but something's wrong. What's wrong? Dr. Shire asked, taking the book. Read it. I can't recall any of it. I can't remember my dreams now. Edward sounded slightly frantic. Dr. Shire opened the journal and began to read the first entry. I can see it outside the window. It turns its head with mine. It mimics me. If I walk, it walks. If I hide, it hides. The arms, they can't move. They cover where a mouth should be. But its eyes can still see. Jesus, its eyes. I don't see an abyss. I see a mirror. January 14th. Dr. Shire began flipping through the entries, stopping at a random one. I can't hear it. I don't think it speaks. It just waits for me. Even when it's not in the window, I can hear walking around outside the door. There's no rhythm to its footsteps. They may start slow and quiet, but suddenly they'll get faster and louder. Faster than any animal or human I know. It knocks on the walls sometimes. Clicks. It'll click after the thunder. Each fucking time. January 16th. Edward began to chew on his fingernails. Doctor, there's something else too. What else is there, Edward? Dr. Shire asked in a very curious tone. I've started to hear things when I'm awake. Clicks, footsteps. I hear them in my house. Auditory hallucinations, most likely caused by lack of sleep. I see. I'm going to recommend some pills to help you sleep longer. I suspect you haven't been getting 8 hours of sleep regularly. Take some time off work. I want you to keep another journal over the next 2 weeks. I'm going to keep this one you gave me today so that I can read it over and see how I can help you. Also pay attention to your diet, Edward. You're looking awfully thin. Dr. Shire wrote another prescription. Edward took the paper and left without another word. Dr. Shire began to read more entries from the journal. He was fascinated. The doctor had always had an intrigue for nightmares. He spent decades studying them. What they were, how they manifested. In his mind, nightmares were ideas that the rational part of the brain refused to entertain. The brain defends itself from these ideas by making them into metaphorical monsters and creatures that terrify the mind as a way to protect the rationality of itself. Dr. Shire had a distinct theory in this realm of the mind. His theory was that if a nightmare is drawn out long enough, the brain would surrender and the idea would be able to transcend the mind and would enter reality as an idea manifested. Essentially, Dr. Shire believed he could give birth to a real-life nightmare. Dr. Shire finished the entries and pondered to himself. He wrote down some more notes. Edward seems to be displaying a high level of extreme fear to the creature in his dreams. The creature is described as very pale, very thin, and tall. It is apparently very agile and quick according to Edward's ears about the footsteps. The monster's arms appear to be covering the mouth, possibly representing a past event Edward sees as unspeakable. The eyes are the most horrifically described, but also the least. Edward believes he sees a mirror of himself in the eyes. Wait, a mirror? Dr. Shire had an epiphany. Yes, a mirror. His pale and thin appearance are making more sense now. Edward may be a prime candidate for my nightmare theory. His past trauma and depression would be likely enough to cause such a creature to be born. I'll have to induce more nightmares in him to see his progression continue further. Must remember to note all physical and mental changes alongside timeline. Damn, Dr. Shire seems to be quite the evil bastard, huh? I am intrigued to see where this goes. Edward returned 2 weeks later, even thinner and paler than before. He had another journal to give Dr. Shire. Ah, Edward, a pleasure to see you. What do you have for me this time? Dr. Shire opened his notepad and clicked his pen. Edward stiffly walked over to the couch, but did not sit. They're getting worse, Doctor. The pills aren't helping. Mary divorced me a week ago. I am very sorry to hear about that, Edward. Why did she leave, if I may ask? She said that I woke up in the middle of the night. She said I woke up and tried to suffocate her, that I tried to choke the life out of her. Violent manifestations. The creature must be attached to a violent idea. What stopped you? Nothing, because I wasn't even home at the time. I was staying over at a friend's house that night. Could you possibly not remember this encounter? My home was over 60 miles away. How could I have been able to run to my own house to try and kill my wife and still be back in time for no one to have noticed? I'm not lying, Doctor. Then who do you believe tried to kill your wife, Edward? Dr. Shire asked in a curious tone. Edward's eyes widened. Doctor? Am I going insane? Dr. Shire looked at Edward confused. No, why do you believe that? Because I can see your notes about me. Edward looked up and locked eyes with the doctor. Dr. Shire became surprised. Really? What do you see? Edward stood up and walked slowly over to the doctor, his arms locked at his sides and his eyes becoming more pronounced with each step. Ooh, something's about to happen, I think. A violent manifestation. You don't seem to believe me, Doctor. What do you believe was trying to kill my wife? I bet you want me to say it was it, don't you? You want me to reveal my insanity for what it is, a game. You want me to play your game, don't you? I'm just a little pig in which you get to test your bullshit of a theory, right? Oink oink. A little pig trots along, and so will I. Give me the meds you want me to take, and then I'll show you. What will you show me, Edward? Dr. Shire asked while writing down the new medications to further induce Edward's nightmares. My old friend. Edward took the papers and left. Dr. Shire shook his head and opened the second journal. He noted a dramatic change in Edward's nightmares. I opened the door. I began to explore different parts of the house. There was very little to no furniture. It was a 2-story house, old and decaying it appeared. I went downstairs to the living room. A TV was on, but only static was showing. The thundering outside had stopped completely. I felt an urge to go to the basement. I walked over and down to the steps leading to the basement door. The basement door remained locked. There was a figure behind at the top of the stairs. It was Dr. Shire. He stood there smiling. He came down the steps and gave me something. I believe it was a key. February 2nd. Dr. Shire closed the journal and took several deep breaths. My God, I've done it. I can't believe it. I've created a beautiful nightmare. Edward arrived back at the office a month later. He had completely changed. His head was shaven, not an ounce of hair left. He was dangerously thin at this point, more skeletal than human even. The dark circles around his eyes only grew worse. Now they hid his eyes almost completely. He entered the office very quietly and took a seat on the couch as usual. Dr. Shire waited behind his desk. The tension of the room created a heavy, awkward atmosphere that could suffocate a mouse. Dr. Shire finally broke the silence. So, Edward, I believe you wanted to show me something. Perhaps your latest journal, he asked. Edward smiled but said nothing. Instead, he pulled out a single piece of paper. He slid the paper onto the coffee table in front of him, all the while still holding eye contact with the doctor. Dr. Shire stood and slowly walked over to the table. He felt that if he took his eyes off Edward, something would happen. Frightening. He picked up the paper and backed his way back to his desk. The doctor finally broke eye contact and looked down to read the words on the paper. I greeted him like an old friend. Dr. Shire looked up and froze in fear at what was standing behind the couch. The room grew darker, but in the darkness across him, he saw the monster he gave life to, the creature he bore, his nightmare come alive. I'm not afraid anymore, Doctor. Do you know why? An unfamiliar voice spoke. Why? Dr. Shire responded, shaking. Simple. You stop being afraid of a nightmare when you become one. But I believe you should be asking yourself one question, Doctor. The voice grew deeper as the creature slowly walked over to the doctor. Dr. Shire couldn't move or scream. All he could do was ask one word. What? The monster was now face to face with the doctor. It looked more terrifying than Edward ever described. The eyes. The eyes. The creature uncovered its mouth, or rather, a lack of one. Am I Edward's nightmare? Or yours? Dr. Robert Shire and Edward Naismith were never heard of again. Alright, dude, that was really good. That was probably my favorite story of the bunch. I loved it. I loved how it started off, innocently enough, with a doctor and a patient, the patient describing what was going on. Slowly but surely, it grew more sinister, more oppressive, much more strange. You find out that the doctor is not, all that he seems. He's hiding something. He's trying out a dangerous experiment. And then, of course, as it always does, the experiment turns on the doctor. Boom. Not only did that story ponder some really interesting and fascinating questions, I feel it really paid off everything that it was setting up in the beginning. It didn't feel like filler. It didn't feel like it was dragging. I really enjoyed that. That was probably an 8 or a 9 out of 10. The way it was written, the way it was structured, it left you with just enough detail to where you were disturbed, you were intrigued, and you were curious about what was going to happen next. And then it paid off by asking that question, is it Edward's nightmare, or is it the doctor's nightmare? Did the doctor create his own nightmare by playing with powers and energies that he did not understand? That's something that I'm gonna have to ponder with, and I'm sure you will too. That was fantastic. I don't know who wrote this story because it doesn't say anywhere on the page, but whoever wrote it, oh, never mind, I found the author. Their name is D. Saigon. Good job, D. Saigon. You made a fantastic story. It had some competition because I really liked the previous two stories. I think the Scraping Wheels was my second favorite. This is probably my favorite. And the Mannequin story was my least favorite, but that's not saying the story is bad. I think all three stories were very strong and very intriguing, but this third one, How to Become a Nightmare, my favorite. It was definitely my favorite. In a rather short amount of time, it was able to ponder really interesting concepts and questions and provide you with something that left you with a lot of questions and a really disturbed feeling as well, because now you have a lot to think about. Definitely really liked that story. It was very good, and I give major props to the author. Fantastic story. Good job. Alright, those were 3 random creepypastas. I really enjoyed these stories, and this was a lot of fun, finding random stories that I may not have heard of otherwise. Really fun stuff, and I really hope you enjoyed this first episode too. I had a lot of fun doing this. I hope it was entertaining, I hope it was fun, and I hope you got something out of it. If you have any thoughts or anything like that, just leave them in the comments below. Otherwise, I would love to do this more often. With that said, Thank you very much for watching and giving this new show a chance. I certainly hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to leave a like and comment your thoughts down below. And with that, follow me on my social medias or check out my Patreon page if you want to support the channel more directly. Thanks for watching, everyone, and stay safe during these trying times. I hope you're all doing well, and that's basically it. Thanks for watching, everyone. Stay awesome. Goodbye.